Hey everyone, welcome to the NoochieCast, episode 2. My name is Matt Nucci, and I want to welcome you back. It's week 2, episode 2. It's our second week. It's the second time we've done this. Do you get the point? We are back, just talking about some gaming news. It's mid-January, which means that there's still not that much going on, although I will say there was a little bit going on this week. So, yeah, let's go to the news. We'll talk about a little bit later what I've been playing. Discuss some of the things I've been gaming on, sinking my teeth into, as they say. And then after that, I want to talk about my top 10 games of the decade. Last week we did my games of the year for 2019, and now I want to expand that and do my top 10 games of the decade. So let's get right into it with some of the news. And the first news is, as I'm recording this, the day of, we have a new Smash character, and that is Byleth from Fire Emblem Three Houses, either male or female, I believe. And I will say, just right off the bat, didn't know that's what their name was. You get the option right at the start of the game to name your character. I was entirely unaware that that's what their name was, so I saw that headline in that news piece, and I was so confused. And that's kind of it. I don't know. I'm a self-proclaimed not that huge fan of Smash. I played Ultimate for like a couple hours at a friend's house, but I've just never been a huge Smash guy. So I don't know. Byleth seems like a fine choice. I know a lot of people were expecting it to be Dante from Devil May Cry, so seeing this as another Fire Emblem character is a little disappointing, but I don't know. Seems like a fine choice. They announced that there are going to be 6 more DLC characters coming in another Fighters Pack. This was the end of Fighters Pack 1, and there's going to be another one at Fighters Pack 2, I think. There are 6 more fighters is the gist of it, that they're not done. So maybe Dante will be coming at some point eventually. Maybe some other weird characters that don't really make sense and that nobody really wants. But, Nintendo does Nintendo things, and I'm not going to blame them. For every weird thing they do, they put out a really fucking good game. So I'm just going to not blame them. And honestly, if you're so mad about Byleth, why not just go play Fire Emblem Three Houses? It's I'll get to this later, but it's pretty gosh darn good. Next on the news is a big one. It's something that, not that we didn't necessarily see coming, but and honestly, I think a lot of people probably expected it. But it is a big hit to one of gaming's biggest events. And that is that PlayStation will not be at E3 2020. It's the launch year of both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and maybe S, who knows. But PlayStation has decided to forego going to E3. And I think this, like I said, not particularly surprising. If you think about it, Microsoft wasn't at E3 last year. PlayStation obviously wasn't. They made a whole deal of it. But PlayStation isn't going to E3 this year, and I think this is, I don't think this is a hot take, but this is setting up them to announce their own event, maybe during E3 week, or certainly some kind of event to announce and kind of blow out the PS5, along with probably, honestly, if I were to put a bet on it, I'd say the PS5 event would probably be outside of E3 week. I know a lot of people are saying February. We were talking about this last week a little bit. I think PS5 event would be like it was in 2013 in February, early in the year. We now have a little more space in the early of the year because of a couple delays that I'll get to in a bit. But I think there will be that event soon, and then probably states of play. You get the gist. I imagine in E3 week, they're not going to let that week go without having some kind of news, especially because Xbox has reinforced that they're going to E3, and that is most certainly going to be the time that they probably reveal a bunch of games that their first-party studios that they've just acquired are working on, along with a bunch of other things that will hopefully for them convince you to buy an Xbox Series X over a PS5, and PlayStation's not going to let that go uncountered, if you are so to speak. That's a new phrase I just came up with. So yeah, I think PlayStation not going to E3 isn't particularly surprising, especially because, one, they weren't there last year, so this isn't a new thing for them, but they've been trying to head towards these state of play things, and I think it seems like the whole spectacle for that is, in the past, it was a big one-time event for the year where they would come out and say, here's what every one of our studios is working on, or here what a bunch of our studios are working on, and then that would probably be it for the year. Maybe something like Gamescom, they would come out and say something, or Paris Games Week, or events like that, they would come out and say something a little smaller, maybe less important, but E3 was when they would announce their big games. But now big games really aren't being revealed in the same way. They didn't even announce the PS5 in an interesting way. It was a Wired article. So it seems like the news is being spread out more evenly throughout the year in smaller doses. And I think that this happening really isn't, this is probably the way that places are going to go. Now, on the other hand, Xbox, like I mentioned, has reinforced that they're going to be at E3, and I think they have a really big opportunity to just make their case. You know, now they don't have huge competition for the fall in terms of hardware, and Xbox has, they're being teed up to make their case and announce a whole buttload of games that will hopefully convince you to buy an Xbox. And I think both are valid. That I think Xbox has shown in the past few years that E3 is the place where they make a lot of announcements, and they also just bring in literally dozens of games. What, they had like 50 games last year, 60, something like that. I don't know, a lot of games, and they've just shown under Phil Spencer that E3 is a huge place that they want to make an impact and make headlines, and they've done that. And I think that that's a really cool thing that they do. I personally just love E3 press conferences. I just think they're the most fun things in the world. And I'm disappointed that PlayStation's not going to have one of those, but I think it's going to be in favor of a different event, press conference kind of thing. And I think PlayStation not going to E3, like I said, doesn't even necessarily mean that they won't have a physical event. I don't know if I'd put money on them having an event during E3 week, but I do think there will be something even outside of the PS5 event that might happen next month. Maybe they have something else that is hands-on. They maybe announce a few other things that their studios are working on and let people go hands-on in a way that E3 does. So I think not going to E3, pretty big news in terms of PlayStation's marketing strategy, but also for kind of I don't want to say death, but at least decline of the importance of E3. Since PlayStation wasn't there last year, I honestly thought it was an anomaly. I thought they were just waiting and holding out to go back this year and really kind of blow their load this year, but that seems to not be the case. So we'll see what they end up doing. E3, EA is left. PlayStation is now left. We're losing publishers pretty quickly, and I think that that's probably the way that it's going to be So a lot of people don't know how long E3 has left. Like I said, fucking love it. It's one of my favorite times of the year. Just seeing every game that you could possibly want in a very nice, concise, 1 week time frame. But that's not the way that publishers are going right now. And, E3, I'm still going to enjoy it. I think it's still going to be super fun. I'm excited to see what Xbox comes out with and what the third parties come out with. And PlayStation will see what they have to do outside of it, too. Not going to E3 doesn't mean not having news. It just means distributing it differently, which all news is fun. I think all news is fun. So, yeah. Moving on, the final part of the news is, as I hinted at earlier, a couple big delays for 2020, major AAA games. There were 3 announced this week, and they're all 3 of them are 3 of the biggest games coming out. The first one is Final Fantasy VII, originally slated to come out in early March, is now coming out a month later on April 10th. This feels like a normal delay. Hopefully, we don't really know the culture there, but hopefully not crunching their employees to death, and they're just giving them an extra month to just tighten up, polish, and not crunch. Don't use that word. Just, stomp out some bugs, get them out of there, and hopefully have Final Fantasy VII Part 1 remake as a good game. Second, also announced at the same time, was Marvel's Avengers. That was going to come out in May, and now it's going to come out on September 3rd. So got a couple month delay on that. I really don't know much what I want to say about that. Avengers looks fine. To me, honestly, I'm not hugely jazzed about it. Personally, I'm not a huge Avengers fan. Not that I don't like it. It's just not my favorite thing in the world. But I think I like Crystal Dynamics. I like the cast. I think it could be fun, but I wasn't hugely blown away by what they showed at E3 last year and in subsequent events. But I think that maybe they're using this extra couple months to maybe add a couple features instead of just having it polished. They're adding some more stuff, making some changes that they think are necessary to make the game more fun, and I'm all for that. I don't love delays, obviously, but I'm a big proponent of putting out or of having to delay a game instead of putting out trash. I think that's starting to be the sentiment around gaming, is people aren't really as mad about delays. Obviously, it's disappointing to see these, but they're almost always good. Delays are almost always good because, especially when they're only a month or a couple months, it's more of a polished thing and making the game better than it is having to redo a bunch of the game. And that's, as long as you're not having to make major changes to the game, that's a good thing, is to have more time. And lastly is probably the biggest game of the year, at least definitely top 3, and that is Cyberpunk 2077 was delayed also a few months. It was originally slated early in the week. Final Fantasy VII moved to April 10th. Cyberpunk was originally slated to release just a week later, but now Cyberpunk is slated to release on September 17th. So they moved it from being right by Final Fantasy VII to being right by Avengers, which it just means it's a great time for gamers, to be completely honest. That just means you're going to have a great time, and it's a good choice. It's a good problem to have, is to have too many games. So I think what I'm seeing here is and CD Projekt Red on the Cyberpunk delay basically said the same thing, that they just want to stomp out some bugs, polish the game, make it a great game, make it a masterpiece, hopefully, instead of just making it a good game. So I really respect them. I hope that game turns out incredible. I'm super excited for it. super jazzed, as is the word I like to use. But one thing I am noticing about this is that I talked about this a little last year. 2020 is looking a lot like 2013 in terms of, and in that it's the last year of a generation before the next generation announces or releases, and even in terms of the actual release dates of the games, they're looking almost identical. If you remember, in 2013, The Last of Us was going to release in April, and then it was delayed 5 weeks or so it was supposed to release in May, and then it was delayed until June, right before E3 started. I'm dumb. But then the other big game that came out that year was, the one of the fucking 1,000 that came out. But the other major biggest game of the year was GTA 5, and that was delayed. I don't actually remember what they made or what they announced as the original release date. I know there were a bunch of delays, but it was delayed until mid-September when the consoles were going to release in November. And it looks like this year is going to mirror that a lot. And if Cyberpunk is going to be the new GTA 5, I am all for that. That would be my favorite thing. But yeah, I just wanted to make that connection because it looks really similar, and hopefully some other things start to match it as well. Like I said, the February event for PS5 potential, and the only thing I hope doesn't match is that I hope Xbox doesn't fuck up their marketing in the launch of the new generation, because that would be brutal. But anyway, let's move on to a little bit of what I've been playing. Just a short recap, given my impressions of a few games. And I'll be honest, most of these I talked about last week because I haven't really moved on. First one, I talked about last week. I was almost done with it. I'm done with it now, is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I really enjoyed that game. I think it had a bunch of issues. There were a couple planets that I thought went on for too long. The first half of the game felt a little shallow in terms of combat. Like, I really wasn't engaged in the combat as much as I did get to be engaged in the latter half of the game, and especially as the last couple boss fights hit. Those last couple boss fights were fantastic. But if you just judge it based on the start of the game, I considered stopping playing because I really didn't enjoy it. But I pushed through, and I really enjoyed the latter half of the game. I'm probably going to do a review discussion on that, longer form video. So take a look out for that. But in general, really enjoyed Jedi Fallen Order. It was super enjoyable, super Souls-like. Obviously, people said it's really not doing much original, but it puts a bunch of the elements from other games, like Uncharted, Metroidvania, Souls, all those kinds of things in one package with a little cherry topper of the Star Wars universe, and just comes out to be a really good package that, outside of the bugs, were really generally satisfying. And I really enjoyed it. But look out for a review discussion for that, hopefully coming soon. Next is one I mentioned last week too, and that's Fire Emblem Three Houses. I am still really enjoying this game. I haven't been able to put too much more time into it, so I don't have that much more to say, but I will just say that I am becoming... I mentioned last week I've never played a Fire Emblem game before this, but the characters in this game are so likable, and I have permadeath on, and I just want to point out that I am on like the 5th battle, and anytime I have a character die in battle, since I have permadeath on, I just quit out and restart. That's how much I love these characters, is I just don't want them to die. I don't want any of them to die, and I will take having to play battles 6 or 7 times when I won them on the first one, if it means I don't have to lose any of them and I can just keep all my friends forever. I love them. Next is kind of a surprise. It's a game that I played on Switch over the summer a little bit, and everyone was obsessed with for a while, and then now I've brought it up with my roommates, and we can't stop playing it, and that game is Tetris 99. We have played this game over the past week-ish, 4 or 5 days, for like 20 hours. It's taken over. It is so goddamn fun. It's so addicting. We play it every waking moment. I know 20 hours over 4 days is not that, but like it kind of is. We just, none of us have won. We all kind of suck. And yet we just can't get enough of this game. It's so much fun. It's just so clever in the way that it does everything, and it's so fast. You can play it as much as you want, and I just love it. Last couple of games, quickly. Sekiro, I'm still working my way through that. It's still as good as always. Nothing really else to say. It's really good, really fun, fast-paced, super fucking hard, but also super satisfying, and just really well-crafted. And lastly is Horizon Zero Dawn. It's a game that I didn't play in 2017. I played I think I looked and I played like half of it, maybe a little less than half of the story, but I put like maybe less than 10 hours in. And now I just got inspired to go back and play it. And I don't know how I didn't ever play this game for that long. It's so good. It's super fun and fluid. It's beautiful. And I love the world. I love the environments. I love the people. It's so good. I'm really not that much farther into it than I was before, but I just love it. It's so good. So that's really what I've been playing. Hoping over the next week or so, probably to just keep pushing through Sekiro and Horizon and Fire Emblem and Tetris. I don't know. Probably just a bunch of games. And that's what I've been playing. But now I really want to move into my top 10 games of the decade. This is a big one. Now, I don't mean for the main segment of every show to be a list, but I know we're now 2 episodes in, and both of them will have been lists. And again, that's not entirely intentional, but it's also really good to start the new decade and year off with looking back at the past year and decade. And since we did Game of the Year last week, I'm really excited to move into my top 10 games of the decade for the 2010s and to kind of get more of a broad look at all the games that I really enjoyed over the past decade. Now, I do want to have a disclaimer that these aren't the games that I think are the best games necessarily. There's a lot of crossover there, but especially you'll see with my top pick, my number one, I when I get there, I can go more in depth because I don't want to spoil it. But you'll see that it's one of my favorite games of all time, if not my favorite game. But I wouldn't even award it that year's Game of the Year when it came out. And there are a couple of those where some of these games are super fun and I love them, but I definitely can see how they're not necessarily the most objectively quality games necessarily. They're all great games, but you'll see what I mean when I get to a few games on this list. But I do want to start with a lot of honorable mentions. There were a lot of really great games that came out this year, and I want to give a shout out to as many as I can. I obviously am leaving so many off the list, but here's just a quick rundown of a few honorable mentions. Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch, just a JRPG. It might have been one of my first real JRPGs ever, and it was a game that really took me by surprise. That was so heartfelt and well crafted and just super fun, and I enjoyed every moment of it. Put in like 70 hours in, I was still itching to get back to it. The next three that I have listed are games that would probably be on the list if it weren't for I tried to keep it to one game per franchise on the list because I just wanted to make it a little more diverse. But each of these three games are well worthy of everything in their own right, but they will reflect games that are already on the list and are pretty similar. And those games are Saints Row 4, Far Cry 4, and Uncharted 4. Each of them, great games. Love those games. Might be some of my favorite games. Again, didn't want to put more than one game from a franchise on the list, but really love them and definitely wanted to give them a shout out. Next is Call of Duty Black Ops 2. I know a lot of people are kind of down on Call of Duty over the past couple of years because they start to get a little formulaic, repetitive, not really pushing any boundaries. But I think Black Ops 2, at least in my opinion, was the apex of Call of Duty multiplayer and really of that Twitch shooter multiplayer standard that Call of Duty set. Black Ops 2 had so many great maps. Almost every one of the maps was incredible. For me personally, it came at a time in my life that I was just so ready to get involved and just so engaged with a game that I couldn't put it down. It's one of my most played games ever. Put well over 100 hours, 150 hours into that game just in the multiplayer. And yeah, I just think it's such a great accomplishment for the Call of Duty series, and with that multiplayer, the Modern Warfare, the original Modern Warfare single player, I think are the two best of each respective mode. And Black Ops 2 is one of my favorite games of the decade. Next is a big one, and that is Grand Theft Auto 5. Again, I love that game so much, put so much time into it, beat it, couldn't stop playing it, would always want to drive around, just go, listen to the radio, do some things, shoot some people, play some tennis. And yeah, super incredibly well-crafted world. It's one of the, if not the best example of a game being able to outlive its shelf life, in that with GTA 5 and GTA Online, it's still going, and it's still one of the most popular games in the world, despite having come out originally 6.5 years ago. It's absurd, and I give so much respect to that game. It's so good. And on the same note is Skyrim. Skyrim is another game that, you just get engrossed in, and you just want to get lost in. Like, literally, you just want to go explore the map and run around, fight dragons. Some of my favorite moments in that game are just wandering and either exploring and finding something you've never seen before, or fighting some big monsters, listening to the gorgeous soundtrack. And that's just one of my favorite games. It's a game that has a quality of it that I kind of have as the standard of meditative games, where Skyrim has, when you're exploring and just listening to the soundtrack and like going and seeing a mountain and seeing all the beautiful landscapes, is those kinds of experiences are top notch in Skyrim, and I really haven't seen many games match that in recent memory. Next is Super Mario Galaxy 2. Hard to believe that came out this decade, but that came out in 2010. And I think Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 are both two of my favorite games of all time. 2, I think I enjoy more because of the addition of Yoshi. I remember getting every single star in that game, and I really was one of those games that I couldn't put down. Probably I put dozens of hours into that game, and it still sticks with me to this day. Next is Batman Arkham City. Just like Arkham Asylum. Its combat is really set the standard for what combat in a lot of these action games would be for the entire decade. And I think Arkham City, personally, I like it actually more than Arkham Asylum because I like the sandbox more, and I just enjoyed being able to fly around, pick up some of the Riddler trophies. I really enjoyed the story, and I just think everything really comes together. And side note, it's not on the list. It's not one of the honorable mentions, but Arkham Knight, I also think is one of the most underrated games of the generation. Of the generation, and I think people kind of shit on it for kind of taking away what Arkham City did well and putting in the Batmobile for no reason, and I can understand that, but I still think that Arkham Knight did so many things well. I thought the Batmobile was fun, and I just think, why not? It's like, you don't have to use the Batmobile. Well, you do sometimes, but there are a lot of points where I just thought Arkham Knight did things really well, and I just wanted to shout that out as probably the most underrated game of the generation. Next is Borderlands 2. Another game that I just really enjoyed running around and shooting shit. Just getting as many guns as I could, going back and forth, getting all the challenges, beating the story, playing with friends. Borderlands is known for being some of the most fun co-op shooting that you can have, and I couldn't agree more. I just really enjoy Borderlands. Think it's such a standard for that kind of fun gameplay that doesn't take itself seriously and really knows what it's going for and hits that really well. Just a couple more honorable mentions. Spec Ops: The Line, really kind of underknown, underappreciated game, although I think a lot of people who do play it really appreciate it for its darkness and depressing qualities. It has moments, some of those. Well, you should have played it by now. Spoilers, but you should have played it by now. The white phosphorus moment, the moments near the end, the twist right at the end, just really punch you in the gut. And I think it may have done that as well as any game this generation, this decade. I haven't seen a game that has really matched it in that quality. The gameplay is whatever, like it is what it is, but I think the story makes up for all of that. Lastly on the list is Watch Dogs 2. The original Watch Dogs had incredible amounts of hype that really could never be lived up to. The game could have been almost perfect, and the hype train for it would have been even more than what the game actually was, and that caused the original to be a bit of a letdown, and people were really down on it for a while. I honestly thought the original was pretty good. I enjoyed my time with it. I understand a lot of the complaints that people had with it, and I agree with a bunch of them. But I think that Watch Dogs 2 came out, really kind of took a hard right turn in terms of its tone and fixed a lot of the problems that the original Watch Dogs had. Now, definitely it's one of the Ubisoft open world games where you're climbing radio towers effectively and you're beating camps and you're going around just doing a bunch of shit in the open world. But I think that it's all so super fun in the way that you hack things and just the world that you're in, and it's one of those games that kind of just hooked me. I think I definitely understand that it's not a perfect game. It's doing nothing really particularly special, but I definitely really enjoyed it for what it was, and I think that it definitely deserves at least a mention on this list. But from there, let's get to the list proper. And we're going to start with a game that I feel like was criminally underplayed because it really just fits into its own genre. And there are very few other games of its, kind of ego, of its well-knownness that it kind of just skates by. And number 10 would be Trials Fusion. This is a game that, I'd played Trials Evolution for a bit, but never really got into it. And then I bought Trials Fusion just because I think I had seen someone on YouTube play it and thought it looked fun. It was on sale, and I bought it, and I instantly was hooked. And I spent hours upon hours getting better, and getting to the point where I could beat some of those extreme tracks when they're just fucking impossible, and beating some of the challenges. One of the reasons that I think Trials Fusion is the best of the series and not Trials Rising, which came out last year, is that Trials Fusion really gave you that incentive to go back to tracks because of those challenges. And I thought it was just so well structured, and the track creator was super cool. Just being able to play things that other people have created. All the DLC was amazing. It's just a game that I got super into and super hooked on. I think that it's so addicting. It does what it wants to so well in its physics, and it's one of those things where you can always feel yourself getting better. It's kind of like, not to make a tired comparison, but the Dark Souls comparison, where those games really are super difficult if you're not doing what you need to do correctly. But when you get it correct, it's super satisfying, and it's so incredibly amazing. And there are those little points where in Trials you get to a checkpoint, or you just get past one obstacle, and maybe the next one just fucks you, but that one, just for there, you get past it and you feel incredible. And it's that for, what is it, like 50 tracks? It's amazing. I loved it. I love that game. And I think people really need to play it. It's a game that's super underplayed. I think it, like I said, definitely just fits into its own genre, and I think other people should play it just because of how fun it is and how satisfying it is. Number 9 on my list is a game that also kind of went under the radar just because it was a PS4 exclusive that came out at a time when PS4 exclusives were not really doing great. And it came out in, I think, August or something like that, and just wasn't really hyped up. And that is Until Dawn. Until Dawn, the choose-your-own-adventure kind of horror game from Supermassive. It features a bunch of real-life actors that are now going on to do bigger things. Hayden Panettiere, Rami Malek, people like that. And it does its horror really well. It's a little cheesy at points. The characters are a little cliched, but I really didn't care about that, because all I cared about was keeping everyone alive, and I think it does that super, super well, where you can definitely see how your actions affect everything, and you definitely can understand where the butterfly effect comes in, and you want to go replay it because you want to get that thing right, and you don't want that person to die, and you don't understand why this happened and this happened and this happened, and you just want to go replay it. And it's so fun in a way that I would have never thought a horror game could be, just because it's so, it doesn't take itself super seriously, I wouldn't say, but it also kind of hits all the horror notes that you want it to hit. There are some jump scares that are scary because they're fucking jump scares, but there's also that tension when you get to the end parts of the game that I won't spoil, but it gets a little supernatural, but never to a point where you're like, I don't understand what's happening anymore, like past the point of understanding, I guess, comprehension. And I really just thought it was a super fun game. It's a game that I go back and replay every once in a while just to see if I can save everyone. I don't actually think I've ever saved everyone in that game, because I'm just dumb and stupid. But it never stopped me from trying, and I just thought it was super interesting to see how it reacted to you and your play style. And I think it's super fun, super engaging. I'm really excited for the Dark Pictures anthology to continue coming out. And yeah, I just really like this genre, and I really like what Supermassive did with it. Next is number 8, and that is a game that just recently came out, and I called my game of the year for 2019, and that is Death Stranding. This is a game that you can see the longer form thing, review discussion that I did, but long story short, is a game that I did not expect to like, and I absolutely adored. I thought it was going to be boring. I thought it was going to be really convoluted and hard to understand. And in fact, it was super fun and super kind of moody and tonal. You knew what it was going for, and it hit it perfectly. It makes the package delivery gameplay sort of fun and rewarding in a way that being able to go up mountains and interact with all the different social things and the ladders that people have built and the bridges that people have started to build and then you're able to finish is just so much fun. And when you're able to just start cruising, getting through some area, it's so much fun. And it's legitimately really rewarding and really interesting. And then throw on top of that the whole story that I actually thought was really interesting and fun to follow. That I think that just all of that comes together and makes a super, super interesting game that, again, like Trials Fusion, is in its own genre. There are very few games like it, and it does what it does so well. Certainly there are flaws. It's not a perfect game, but it's so much fun in what it wants to do, and it's super satisfying when you deliver packages, get to a new cutscene, get to new story bits. So moving on from that is, oddly enough, another PlayStation exclusive. I didn't even think about that when putting together this list, but there are a bunch of PlayStation exclusives here, and I think that just is kind of a testament to Sony's first-party lineup. So number 7 is my game of the year from 2018, actually, and that is Marvel's Spider-Man. Insomniac comes with everything they learned from Sunset Overdrive with the movement and puts it on top of a Marvel-licensed, full-fledged Spider-Man game, a super fun, interesting story that doesn't take itself too seriously, kind of gets all the pieces together with all the villains and all the people in Peter's life. And on top of that, makes some of the most fun gameplay I've played this generation. It's swinging around New York is incredible. It's so fluid. It's so natural. It does everything you want it to do. And I really couldn't get enough of it. It's one of the few games where I just was continuing to play it, and as I was playing it, I just said, I need to keep going. I want to 100% this game. I want to platinum this game. And that is just something that is a true testament to how special a game is, because I just continued. I couldn't get enough. I wanted to keep playing. I wanted to keep swinging around, to keep punching people, to keep using my web-slinging fingers. And, just put all of that together and make it just an unbelievable experience. Next is number 6, and this is a game who I think I gave an honorable mention to its remake in last week's episode, but I'm talking about the original here, and that is Catherine. Catherine is something I talked about last week, so I don't want to rehash myself too much, but it's like a 2-part game between relationship sim and reverse Cubert puzzle block simulator, I guess. And it's a game where when you're in the 2 parts, you never want to stop playing that part. When I'm in the puzzle block situation, I just want to keep doing those puzzles because they're super hard, but they're also really satisfying, and they're really fun to do, and they're not they don't feel like they take too long, and then they just keep going. But then you're done with it, and you get to the relationship sim, and it's a really interesting and fun and complicated relationship situation. And then when those are ending and you're doing all those, you don't want those to end either. And it's one of the few games where you're back and forth between a couple of parts, and I just didn't want either part to end. But then when I'm sad about one part ending, I get to the other one, and I'm super excited to play that again. And I think it's another criminally underplayed game that people don't really talk about in terms of its story or its mechanics, because it's so complicated. It's very Japanese, very anime, but it's so much fun. And I think it's a game that everyone should play, especially with Full Body coming out. people have no excuse now to not play it. And now we can move on to number 5. And at this point, we're getting into the meat of the list. We're getting into a game at number 5 that's, I think, from my favorite series of all time, certainly from my favorite developer of all time. And I don't think that that's something that a lot of people will argue, because I think a lot of people agree with that. And that game is Uncharted 3. Now, if Uncharted 2 had come out this decade, which I will say I originally thought it did, and I originally had put it on this list before checking, that would probably be number 2 or number 3. But Uncharted 3 still makes the list. It's still absolutely phenomenal storytelling, at a breakneck pace. I love Nate. I love Elena. I love Chloe. I love Sully. I love every character in that game. And I think there's not much to say about it that hasn't already been said. But I think just it does its story so well, its set pieces so well. It's absolutely breathtaking. It's heartbreaking. It's fun. It's whimsical, but it's also enthralling. I think it's just one of my favorite games series of all time for sure. Uncharted 4, like I mentioned, is an honorable mention. Uncharted 2 is probably in my top 10 games of all time. And Uncharted 3 definitely lands on my top 10 games of the decade for sure. Moving on to number 4, we're on to the other side of the coin, and that is an Xbox exclusive, the only one on this list, and that would be Forza Horizon 3. Now, the Forza Horizon series is, I think, pretty well-known and well-established to be one of the best, if not the best, racing series in gaming right now. And in my opinion, I'm big on the open world rather than the more race-based, kind of linear Forza Motorsport series, which is why Forza Horizon really appeals to me. And legitimately, I'm not even a racing guy. I think that I'm just not a huge car guy, so I just have never really been into racing. But I played Forza Horizon 3 for a bit, and then I got hooked, and then I played it for like 90 hours. So that can kind of tell you how much fun I had with it. It's a game where it's very relaxing. It doesn't require too much effort to be played, but at the same time, it's so fun just to go around if you're actually doing races and doing the championship series, or if you want to just go around and find some XP boards or fast travel boards and things like that, do some challenges. It's all fun. Every part of it is super fun, super rewarding, and I think the driving gameplay it's arcadey, but in a really fun way that I think a lot of games kind of miss out on. A lot of games start to focus more on the sim parts of it and forget why racing games or forget what parts of arcadey racing games are fun, at least for me. I know there are a lot of people who don't agree with me, but I prefer arcadey racing games, and I think Forza Horizon 3 is just some of the best racing combined with one of the best open worlds. And I'm really excited to see where Playground takes both the Forza Horizon series after this, as well as their future open world games that are unannounced. Now, moving on to number 3 is another game that its sequel was an honorable mention, but also could have made the list proper. And that game is Far Cry 3. Now, this game, I think, I wouldn't say it's underrated, because I think it's rated pretty well, in that I think a lot of people understand it. But in terms of Game of the Year nominations, it didn't get what I thought it should have gotten in recognition, because it came out so late in 2012. And I think people have talked about this with IGN, at least. They had basically voted on Journey before this game came out, or before many of the editors had time to play it. And I think that's a testament. And then they would have voted for Far Cry 3 as Game of the Year if they had had time to play it. But I do think that that's a testament to how good this game is, and how kind of under the radar it flew at the time, and then how it's kind of just built up a cult following. Not even a cult following, I think, just a following that Far Cry 3 specifically has set the tone for what Ubisoft sandbox games are, and in turn what sandbox games in general have kind of become, where you run around a vast open world, you get collectibles, you do the base assaults, you just go kill a bunch of people, have fun with it, run around, do your shit, and just take over. And I think that it was that part of it and the gameplay of it that was super, super incredibly fun, along with the story of the game, specifically of the villain, Voss, who, of course, we all know he dies halfway through the game, which kind of shitty. But even with that said, he's still one of the most memorable villains of the decade, I would say. And I think that that is really saying something with the amount of good characters and stories we've had this decade. So, Far Cry 3 is really just encapsulates what open world sandbox games are today, and really kind of kicked it off with both what Ubisoft games are, and kind of makes you understand why the games have all become like that, because it does it so well. So now we're down to the last two. I think one of these will be pretty standard on this list, and one of these is probably going to be pretty controversial. And number two, I think, is the standard one that a lot of people are going to have on here. Comes again from my favorite developer. Sequel coming out pretty soon, and that is, of course, The Last of Us. Again, just like Uncharted 3, there's not much I can say about it that isn't already said. You can also go check out my recent retrospective on The Last of Us to kind of get more in-depth thoughts on what I think about it. But just in short, it's a masterpiece in what it does. Its story is so well told. The dialogue is supernatural. It's very natural, not supernatural. It's characters, the dynamic between Joel and Ellie is so interesting, how it evolves over time. Even with some of the side characters or enemies, who are the human enemies, they're really interesting in how they're actually human, and their human elements as to why they've gotten to what they've become. The way that it opens, the reason how Joel becomes the way he becomes and why he sees Ellie the way that he does. It's the whole story, I think a lot of people will agree, is at least one of, if not the best stories told in gaming, maybe ever. And I think it's fully deserving of the 10s that it got. And the gameplay, even, I think there are a lot of people who will say the gameplay is the weakest part of the game. Even there, I think it does its stealth gameplay really well. Obviously, it gets frustrating at points, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties with the clickers and the runners and being able to kill you in one hit. But it also is super tense, and it does what it needs to do to hit that vibe. And I completely agree with the decisions that they made, even if it does get hard and frustrating, and it turns some people away. I think its gameplay really does complement its story really well. And even if the gameplay were bad, I think the story entirely makes up for it. I think it does everything so well. There are so many aspects about it that are just masterfully done. And that's what makes it number 2 on my list. Number 1, though, is a game that I don't think was really well appreciated because it came out at a time where a lot of games were coming out. And it's certainly fun. It's part of a series that does its series no justice in being called a GTA clone, especially originally. And I think that this game really took it out of that term and instead made it into its own idea of a game. And this game is Saints Row the Third. Now, Saints Row the Third, I have documented in the recent retrospective I did as my favorite game of all time. Now, I will say that, again, like I've said with a bunch of these, it's not perfect. I super definitely understand why there are people who don't like it, or there are things that people will say other games have done better, or there are things that they don't like. I definitely understand those, but I disagree with them with a lot of them, at least, because I think that Saints Row really kind of took the step up from 2 to 3, And this game made it so that it kicks off with one of my favorite opening missions in gaming ever, and then never slows down, where you're going through the story, and the story is so much fun. It's just off the walls, bonkers, funny, hilarious, but at the same time, there are characters that you love and places you want to go, and the gameplay just adds on to that. You can go around Steelport wherever you want, whenever you want, pretty much. And it's so much fun to just, if you want to just go drive around and listen to music, or if you want to just go hit people with a fucking dildo, or if you want to just go up and sit in the sick penthouse for like 2 hours and just do nothing. All of it's possible. All of it is incredibly fun. I could not get enough of this game. Literally, I think I've bought it 3 or 4 times, and I've played it to completion every time. I've probably beaten it 9 or 10 times total. That's how much I love this game, that I just think that the gameplay is so perfectly put together in a way that is so fluid and is really rewarding in a way that you're able to go around, drive wherever you want to go, kill everyone. You can do all those base assaults that I mentioned, or you can just go around and fuck around. You know what I mean? That's all you really need to do in this game. Or you have this whole story on the other side of it that is really fun. It's not saying anything special, but it's really fun. It's surprising in a lot of points that I just cannot get enough of this game. I've been hoping for 9 years now that they would remaster it, or not remake it, but at least remaster it, bring it to the new gen consoles, either the PS4 or the PS5, and just so that I can play it again. And I really want to do that because I cannot get enough of it. Like I said, it's the game that I've probably put the most time into ever. At least it's definitely in that list of games that I've put at least definitely over 100, 150 hours into, just because it's so much fun. I cannot get enough of it. And I know I've said that a couple times, but I really can't. I want to play it again. Every time I see it on the shelf or in my list of games, I want to go back and play it. And that's really what makes it my game of the decade, my favorite game. So, yeah, that's my top 10 games. And that's MB Nucci. Fuck. And that's the NoochieCast episode 2. So, yeah, let me know what you thought. Any feedback, certainly appreciated. Or just any comments, any lists that you guys have. But other than that, I just want to thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.